The blood on her hands was dry when Jacob Mercer found her slumped against the weathered fence post, her face pale as morning frost, and her breathing so shallow he thought she might already be dead. He had been riding since midnight, chasing a stolen mare through the Texas scrubland outside San Antonio, and the last thing he expected to find in the breaking dawn of August 1878 was a woman alone in the wilderness, looking like she had crawled through hell to get there. Jacob dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a soft thud that did not wake her. He approached cautiously, one hand resting on the revolver at his hip, because anyone found in such circumstances could be dangerous or desperate or both. But as he drew closer, he saw that she was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and tumbled across her shoulders in tangles. Her dress, once a respectable blue calico, was torn at the hem and stained with dust and what looked like dried blood. Her hands, small and delicate, bore scratches and cuts that told a story of struggle. He knelt beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there, steady but weak, and he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. She was alive. Whatever had happened to her, she had survived it. He settled himself on the ground beside her, leaning back against the fence post, and decided to wait. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for the harsh reality of the world below. He had learned long ago that rushing an injured person could do more harm than good, and something about the woman made him want to be there when she woke, to let her know she was not alone. Jacob Mercer was 30 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with sun-weathered skin and dark eyes that had seen more than their fair share of trouble. He had been working as a ranch hand and occasional tracker for the past decade, ever since he had left his family's farm in Missouri after his parents died of fever. The West had called to him with promises of freedom and opportunity, and while he had found plenty of the former, the latter had been more elusive. He made enough to get by, kept his head down, and tried to stay out of trouble. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding him anyway. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the scrubland, and still the woman slept. Jacob watched the light play across her face, illuminating features that were fine-boned and pretty despite the dirt and exhaustion. There was something about her that stirred something in his chest, something he had not felt in a long time. Maybe it was the vulnerability of finding someone so clearly in need of help, or maybe it was something else, something he could not quite name. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they were green, the color of new grass after spring rain, and filled with immediate panic. She jerked upright, gasping, and her hand flew to her side as though reaching for a weapon that was not there. Jacob raised his hands slowly, showing her he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and calm. "You are safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and he could see her trying to assess whether he was telling the truth. Her gaze darted around, taking in the empty landscape, the fence post, the rising sun, and finally came back to him. He saw the moment she decided he was not an immediate threat because her shoulders sagged and some of the tension left her body. "Who are you?" She asked, her voice hoarse and cracked from thirst. "Jacob Mercer. I am a ranch hand from over near the Henderson spread. I found you here about an hour ago. You were sleeping." He reached for his canteen and held it out to her. "You look like you could use some water." She took it with trembling hands and drank deeply, water spilling from the corners of her mouth and running down her chin. When she finally lowered the canteen, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been suspicion. It was hard to tell. "Thank you," she said. "I am Eliza Hartwell." "What happened to you, Miss Hartwell?" Jacob asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "How did you end up out here alone?" Eliza looked away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For a long moment she said nothing, and Jacob thought she might not answer at all. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was traveling with my uncle from Galveston to San Antonio. We were supposed to meet my aunt there to start a new life. But 3 days ago, we were attacked by outlaws. They wanted the money my uncle was carrying, the money we needed to buy a shop in the city. He tried to fight them off, but there were too many. Her voice broke and she closed her eyes. They killed him, shot him right in front of me. I tried to run, but one of them grabbed me. I fought him, and in the struggle I managed to get his knife. I stabbed him, and when he let go, I ran. I have been running ever since, hiding during the day and moving at night. I must have collapsed here. I do not even remember sitting down. Jacob felt a surge of anger at the men who had done this, who had killed an innocent man and terrorized a young woman for money. It was the kind of story he had heard too many times, the kind that made him wonder what kind of world they were living in where such things happened every day. "I am sorry," he said, and he meant it. "No one should have to go through that, but you are alive and that counts for something. Do you know where the outlaws went?" Eliza shook her head. "I do not know, I just ran. I did not look back. Can you describe them?" "There were 4 of them. The leader had a scar across his cheek and he wore a black hat. The others I do not remember much. It all happened so fast." She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes now. "My uncle, he was a good man. He did not deserve to die like that." "No, he did not," Jacob agreed. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, a gesture meant to comfort, and was surprised when she did not pull away. "But right now, we need to get you somewhere safe. Can you ride?" Eliza looked at his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, and nodded. "I think so. I used to ride when I was younger, back in Virginia before we moved to Texas." Jacob stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her, his hands on her arms. She was smaller than he had realized, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, and she felt fragile, like something that might break if handled too roughly. But there was strength in her too, the kind that came from surviving something terrible and still being able to stand. He helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at first, uncomfortable with the closeness, but as he urged the horse into a walk, she relaxed slightly, leaning back against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat through the layers of fabric between them, fast and fluttering like a trapped bird. They rode in silence for a while, the sun climbing higher and the heat of the day beginning to build. Jacob knew they needed to get to town soon, both for Eliza's sake and because he wanted to report what had happened to the sheriff. Men like the ones who had killed her uncle needed to be brought to justice, though Jacob knew that justice in these parts was often slow and uncertain. "Where are we going?" Eliza asked after a while. "San Antonio," Jacob said. "It is about 10 miles from here. I will take you to the doctor first, make sure you are not hurt worse than you think, and then we will go to the sheriff. He needs to know what happened." "I do not have any money," Eliza said quietly. "The outlaws took everything." "Do not worry about that right now," Jacob said. "We will figure it out." He felt her nod against his chest, and they continued on in silence. The landscape around them was harsh and unforgiving, all scrub brush and rocky soil baked hard by the relentless sun. It was not an easy place to live, but it was home, and Jacob could not imagine being anywhere else. There was a beauty to it, a stark simplicity that appealed to him. Out here, a man knew where he stood. There were no pretenses, no false promises. You worked hard, you survived. You did not, and the land swallowed you whole. As they rode, Jacob found his thoughts drifting to the woman in his arms. He did not know anything about her beyond the tragedy that had brought them together, but he found himself wanting to know more. There was something about her, something that went beyond the circumstances of their meeting. Maybe it was the way she had looked at the sunrise when she first woke, with a mixture of fear and wonder, or maybe it was the quiet strength he sensed beneath her fragile exterior. Whatever it was, it stirred something in him, something he had thought long dead. They reached San Antonio just before noon, the town bustling with activity despite the heat. Wagons rumbled down the dusty streets, and people moved about their business with the purposeful energy of those who had work to do and little time to waste. Jacob guided the horse through the crowd, making his way to the doctor's office on the east side of town. Dr. Samuel Whitmore was a competent physician, one of the few in San Antonio who actually seemed to care about his patients rather than just their ability to pay. Jacob helped Eliza down from the horse and led her inside. The doctor's office was cool and dim, a welcome relief from the heat outside, and smelled of carbolic acid and something herbal that Jacob could not identify. Doctor. Whitmore looked up from his desk as they entered, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Jacob Mercer, he said, standing. What brings you here? Are you injured? Not me, Doc, Jacob said. This is Miss Eliza Hartwell. She has been through a rough time and I wanted to make sure she is all right. Dr. Whitmore was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked at Eliza with concern and gestured toward the examination table. Please, have a seat, Miss Hartwell. Let me take a look at you. Eliza hesitated, glancing at Jacob, and he gave her an encouraging nod. She moved to the table and sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Doctor. Whitmore began his examination, asking questions in a gentle voice as he checked her pulse, looked at the cuts on her hands, and examined the bruises that were beginning to show on her arms. Jacob stood by the door, feeling awkward and out of place. He was not used to situations like this, where he felt helpless and uncertain. He was a man of action, more comfortable with a rope in his hands or a horse beneath him than standing in a doctor's office waiting for news. After what felt like an eternity, Doctor. Whitmore straightened and smiled at Eliza. You are going to be fine, Miss Hartwell. You are dehydrated and exhausted, and those cuts need to be cleaned and bandaged, but there is nothing seriously wrong. You are a very lucky young woman. Thank you, Doctor, Eliza said, and Jacob heard the relief in her voice. Dr. Whitmore turned to Jacob. She needs rest and plenty of water, and she should not be alone for the next few days just in case. Do you have somewhere she can stay? Jacob had not thought that far ahead. He lived in a bunkhouse on the Henderson ranch, and there was no place for a woman there. He could pay for a room at the boarding house, but that would take most of the money he had saved, and he was not sure Eliza would be comfortable staying alone after what she had been through. I will figure something out, Jacob said. Dr. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. See that you do. She has been through enough. After the doctor finished bandaging Eliza's hands and giving her some willow bark tea for the pain, Jacob led her back outside. The sun was high now, beating down mercilessly, and Eliza squinted against the brightness. Jacob guided her to the shade of the building's overhang and tried to think. I am going to take you to the sheriff, he said finally. He needs to know what happened. After that, we will find you a place to stay. Eliza nodded, but he could see the weariness in her eyes. She was exhausted, running on nothing but sheer determination, and he knew she needed rest more than anything. But they had to report the crime first. It was the right thing to do, even if Jacob suspected it would not lead to much. The sheriff's office was on Main Street, a small wooden building with a faded sign hanging above the door. Sheriff Tom Bradley was a heavy-set man in his 40s, with a thick mustache and a perpetual look of mild annoyance. He looked up from his desk as Jacob and Eliza entered, his eyes narrowing. Jacob, he said by way of greeting, what can I do for you? Jacob explained the situation, with Eliza filling in the details. She told the sheriff about the attack, about her uncle's murder, about the outlaws and their leader with the scar. Sheriff Bradley listened, making notes on a piece of paper, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. I will send word to the surrounding towns, see if anyone has seen these men, but I have got to be honest with you, Miss Hartwell. Without more to go on, the chances of finding them are slim. Texas is a big place, and men like that know how to disappear. You have to try, Eliza said, her voice breaking. They killed my uncle. They cannot just get away with it. I will do what I can, Sheriff Bradley said, but his tone made it clear he did not hold out much hope. In the meantime, where are you staying? Eliza looked at Jacob, and he saw the helplessness in her eyes. She had no money, no family in San Antonio, nowhere to go. She was completely dependent on the kindness of strangers, and that was a precarious position to be in. "I will make sure she has a place to stay," Jacob said, though he still had no idea how he was going to manage it. Sheriff Bradley nodded. "See that you do. And Miss Hartwell, if you remember anything else, anything at all, you come see me." They left the sheriff's office and stood on the wooden sidewalk, the afternoon sun beating down on them. Jacob could feel Eliza's despair radiating off her in waves, and he wanted to do something, anything, to make it better. But he did not know what. "Come on," he said gently. "Let us get you something to eat, and then we will figure out the rest." He led her to a small restaurant down the street, a modest establishment that served simple but hearty food. They sat at a table by the window, and Jacob ordered stew and bread for both of them. Eliza ate slowly, mechanically, as though she was going through the motions without really tasting the food. Jacob watched her, his heart aching for what she had lost. "I do not know what I am going to do," Eliza said quietly, setting down her spoon. "I have no money, no family here. My aunt was expecting us, but I do not even know how to find her. My uncle had her address, but it was in his things, and the outlaws took everything." "What is your aunt's name?" Jacob asked. "Margaret Hartwell. She married a man named Thomas Brennan. They were supposed to have a house somewhere in San Antonio, but I do not know where." Jacob thought for a moment. "San Antonio is not that big. Someone might know them. We can ask around." Eliza looked at him, and for the first time since he had found her, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You would do that? Help me find them?" "Of course," Jacob said. "You cannot do this alone." He did not know why he was committing himself to this, why he felt such a strong need to help this woman he had only just met. Maybe it was because she reminded him of how alone he had felt when he first came west, or maybe it was something else, something he was not ready to acknowledge yet. Whatever the reason, he knew he could not walk away from her. They spent the rest of the afternoon asking around town, stopping at shops and saloons and boarding houses, describing Margaret and Thomas Brennan and hoping someone would recognize the names. Most people shook their heads, unable to help, but finally, late in the day, they struck gold. The proprietor of the general store, a thin man with a receding hairline, nodded when they mentioned the Brennans. "Sure, I know them," he said. "Tom Brennan owns a small dry goods store over on Commerce Street. Nice couple. They have been here about a year now." Jacob felt a surge of relief, and he saw it mirrored in Eliza's face. They thanked the man and made their way to Commerce Street, where they found the store easily. It was a tidy establishment with a hand-painted sign above the door that read Brennan Dry Goods. Jacob pushed open the door and a small bell chimed overhead. A woman in her 40s with dark hair streaked with gray and a kind face looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes widened as she saw Eliza and the color drained from her face. "Eliza," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Is that you, Aunt Margaret?" Eliza said, and then she was rushing forward and the two women were embracing, both of them crying. Jacob stood back, feeling like an intruder on their reunion, but also feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that he had been able to help. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret looked at Jacob, her eyes red from crying. "Who are you?" she asked, not unkindly. "Jacob Mercer, ma'am. I found Eliza this morning out in the scrubland. She was in a bad way, so I brought her here." Margaret's expression shifted to one of alarm. "What happened? Where is William? Where is my brother?" Eliza's face crumpled, and Margaret seemed to understand immediately. She pulled Eliza close again, murmuring words of comfort, and Jacob felt his throat tighten. He turned away, giving them a moment of privacy, and studied the shelves of goods, seeing nothing. Eventually, Margaret composed herself and turned to Jacob. "Thank you for bringing her to me. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found her. Please tell me everything." Jacob recounted the story, with Eliza adding details when she could manage it. Margaret listened, her face growing paler with each word, and when they finished, she sank into a chair, looking devastated. "William was a good man," she said quietly. "He did not deserve that. None of this is right." "No, ma'am, it is not," Jacob agreed. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. You brought her all this way, made sure she was safe, helped her find me. That is no small thing, Mr. Mercer. I am in your debt. You do not owe me anything, Jacob said. I did what anyone would do. Not anyone, Margaret said, but you did, and I am grateful. Please stay for supper. It is the least I can do. Jacob started to decline, feeling like he had already intruded enough, but Eliza looked at him with those green eyes, and he found himself nodding. I would be honored, ma'am. Margaret sent her husband, Thomas, to fetch Jacob's horse and bring it around back, where it could be stabled for the night. Thomas Brennan was a quiet man with a weathered face and capable hands, the kind of man who worked hard and said little. He greeted Jacob with a firm handshake and a nod of thanks, and Jacob liked him immediately. They ate supper in the small apartment above the store, a simple meal of chicken and potatoes, but it was warm and filling, and Jacob realized he had not eaten a proper meal in days. The conversation was subdued, weighed down by the tragedy that had brought them together. But there were moments of lightness, too, when Margaret told stories about Eliza as a child, and Eliza laughed despite her grief. Jacob found himself watching Eliza throughout the meal, noticing the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was listening. There was a grace to her, even in her exhaustion and sorrow, and he felt that strange stirring in his chest again, stronger now. After supper, Margaret showed Eliza to a small bedroom and Jacob prepared to leave. But as he was putting on his hat, Eliza appeared in the doorway, her hair brushed and her face clean, looking more like herself than she had all day. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. I do not know how to repay you. You do not need to repay me, Jacob said. I am just glad you are safe. Will I see you again? She asked, and there was something in her voice that made his heart skip. If you want to, he said. I do, she said, and she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Jacob left the Brennan home feeling lighter than he had in years, as though something inside him had shifted. He rode back to the Henderson ranch through the darkness, the stars bright overhead, and thought about green eyes and a smile that made the world seem a little less harsh. Over the next few weeks, Jacob found reasons to come into town. He told himself it was to check on the progress of the sheriff's investigation or to pick up supplies, but the truth was he wanted to see Eliza. He would stop by the Brennan store, and she would smile when she saw him, and they would talk. At first, the conversations were about her uncle, about the attack, about the grief that still weighed on her. But gradually, they began to talk about other things. She told him about her life in Virginia, about her parents who had died when she was young, about her dreams of starting a dressmaking business. He told her about Missouri, about his parents, about the loneliness of the West and the beauty he found in it. He learned that she was intelligent and strong-willed, with a sharp wit that surprised him. She had opinions about everything, from politics to literature to the best way to bake bread, and she was not afraid to share them. She challenged him in ways he was not used to, made him think about things he had always taken for granted. And the more time he spent with her, the more he realized he was falling in love. It terrified him. Jacob had never been good with feelings, had always kept his emotions locked down tight. But Eliza had a way of slipping past his defenses, of making him want to open up to let her in. And the more he fought it, the stronger it became. One evening, about a month after he had found her, Jacob invited Eliza to go for a walk. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air was finally beginning to cool after the oppressive heat of the day. They walked along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and talked about nothing and everything. Can I ask you something? Eliza said after a while. Anything, Jacob said. Why did you help me that morning? You did not know me, you could have just ridden past. Jacob thought about it for a moment, trying to put into words something he did not fully understand himself. I guess because it was the right thing to do. You needed help and I was there, it is as simple as that. I do not think it is that simple, Eliza said. Not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have been too afraid or too busy with their own lives. But you stopped. You sat with me while I slept. You made sure I was safe." "Why?" Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun cast a golden glow over her face, and he thought he had never seen anyone so beautiful. "Maybe because I know what it is like to be alone," he said quietly, "and I did not want you to feel that way." Eliza looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression, something soft and vulnerable. "I am glad you found me," she said. "So am I," Jacob said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. They stood there for a moment, the world around them fading away, and Jacob felt the pull between them, strong and undeniable. He wanted to kiss her, to close the distance between them and see if her lips were as soft as they looked. But he held back, unsure if she felt the same way, afraid of ruining what they had. Eliza seemed to sense his hesitation because she took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Jacob," she said softly, and it was all the encouragement he needed. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, then with more intensity as she kissed him back. It was like coming home, like finding something he had not known he was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Eliza was smiling. "I have been wanting you to do that for weeks," she said. "I have been wanting to do it since the first time I saw you smile," Jacob admitted. They walked back to town hand in hand, and everything felt different now, charged with possibility. Jacob knew that life in the West was hard and uncertain, that there were no guarantees of anything. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he had found something worth holding on to. Over the following months, their relationship deepened. Jacob courted Eliza properly, with Margaret and Thomas's blessing. He would come to town on Sundays, his one day off from the ranch, and they would spend the day together. Sometimes they would go for rides out into the countryside, with Eliza riding the gentle mare that Thomas kept in the stable. Other times they would simply sit in the store after it closed, talking while Margaret prepared supper upstairs. Jacob learned everything about her, from her favorite color blue, like the dress she had been wearing when he found her, to her deepest fears, being alone, being helpless, losing the people she loved. And he shared himself with her in return, telling her things he had never told anyone, about his dreams and his regrets, and the man he wanted to be. Margaret and Thomas treated Jacob like family, welcoming him into their home and their lives without reservation. Thomas taught him about running a business, about the delicate balance of inventory and customer relations, and Jacob found it fascinating in a way he had not expected. He had always thought of himself as a ranch hand, someone who worked with his hands and lived outdoors, but now he began to wonder if there might be other possibilities, other futures he had not considered. One evening in October, as the weather began to turn cooler and the leaves on the few trees in town started to change color, Jacob asked Margaret and Thomas if he could speak with them privately. They sat in the small parlor above the store, and Jacob felt his palms sweating despite the cool air. "I want to ask for Eliza's hand in marriage," he said, getting straight to the point because he knew if he did not say it immediately, he might lose his nerve. "I know I am just a ranch hand, and I do not have much to offer her. But I love her, and I promise I will do everything I can to make her happy, to give her a good life." Margaret and Thomas exchanged a look, and for a terrible moment, Jacob thought they were going to say no. But then Margaret smiled, and Thomas reached out and shook his hand. "We know you will," Thomas said. "You are a good man, Jacob. We would be honored to have you as part of this family." Jacob felt relief wash over him, so strong it made him dizzy. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you. This means more to me than I can say. Have you spoken to Eliza about this?" Margaret asked. "Not yet. I wanted your blessing first." "Well, you have it," Margaret said. "Now go ask her before you burst from holding it in." Jacob laughed, feeling lighter than air. He found Eliza downstairs in the store, restocking shelves by lamplight. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her face lit up with that smile that always made his heart skip. I thought you had left, she said. Not yet, Jacob said. I need to ask you something first. She set down the bolts of fabric she had been holding and turned to face him, her expression curious. What is it? Jacob took a deep breath and reached for her hands. They were warm and soft in his, and he could feel her pulse fluttering in her wrists. Eliza, I know we have not known each other very long, only a few months, but I feel like I have known you my whole life. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I do not have much, but what I have, I want to share with you. Will you marry me? For a moment, Eliza just stared at him, her eyes wide and shining with tears. Then she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, and he knew her answer before she said it. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, Jacob, I will marry you. He held her close, feeling her heart beating against his chest, and thought about that morning when he had found her against the fence post, looking so small and broken. He thought about how far they had both come since then, how much had changed. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that finding her that dawn had been the best thing that ever happened to him. They were married in November, in a small ceremony at the church in San Antonio. Margaret cried through the entire service, and Thomas looked proud as he walked Eliza down the aisle. Jacob wore his best suit, brushed and pressed until it looked almost new, and Eliza wore a dress of white lace that she had sewn herself, working on it in secret for weeks. She was so beautiful that Jacob felt his throat tighten when he saw her, and he had to blink back tears. They exchanged their vows in front of the preacher, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. And when the preacher said Jacob could kiss his bride, he did, pouring all the love and hope he felt into that one moment. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the Brennan home, with food and music and neighbors who had become friends. Jacob danced with Eliza in the small parlor, holding her close and thinking about the future they would build together. He had been saving money, and with Thomas's help, he had found a small house on the outskirts of town that they could afford. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. That night in their new home, Jacob carried Eliza over the threshold and set her down gently in the lamplight. She looked around the bare rooms, at the few pieces of furniture they had managed to scrape together, and smiled. It is perfect, she said. It is empty, Jacob said. We do not even have curtains. We will make it a home, Eliza said, together, and they did. Over the following months, they worked to turn the little house into something that felt like theirs. Eliza sewed curtains for the windows and cushions for the chairs. Jacob built shelves and a table, working in the evenings after his long days at the ranch. They planted a small garden in the yard, vegetables and herbs that would help stretch their modest income. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way Jacob had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had roots. In February of 1879, Jacob left his job at the Henderson Ranch and went to work with Thomas at the dry goods store. It had not been an easy decision. He loved working with horses and cattle, loved being outdoors, but he knew that if he wanted to give Eliza the life she deserved, he needed a more stable income and better prospects. Thomas had offered him a partnership with the understanding that one day, when Thomas was ready to retire, Jacob and Eliza would take over the business. It was an opportunity Jacob could not pass up, even though it meant giving up a life he had known for 10 years. To his surprise, he found he enjoyed the work. There was a satisfaction in helping customers find what they needed, in keeping the books balanced and the shelves stocked, and he got to see Eliza every day, which made everything worthwhile. They worked side by side, learning the business together, and Jacob marveled at how naturally it all seemed to come to her. She had a gift for dealing with people, for making them feel welcome and valued, and the customers loved her. By summer, they had settled into a comfortable routine. Jacob would open the store in the mornings while Eliza prepared breakfast. They would work together through the day, taking turns helping customers and managing inventory. In the evenings, they would close up shop and walk home together, talking about their day and making plans for the future. On Sundays, they would go to church and then spend the afternoon with Margaret and Thomas. Or sometimes they would ride out into the countryside, just the two of them, and enjoy the quiet and the open sky. Life was not perfect. There were hard times, like when a drought hit and farmers could not afford to buy supplies, or when Eliza fell ill with fever and Jacob spent 3 terrifying days thinking he might lose her. But they weathered those storms together, and each time they came through stronger than before. In October of 1879, Eliza told Jacob she was pregnant. He was in the back room of the store, unpacking a shipment of canned goods when she came in and closed the door behind her. He looked up, saw the expression on her face, and immediately set down the crate. "What is it?" he asked, worried. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, and she was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. "Jacob, I am going to have a baby." For a moment he could not process the words. Then the meaning hit him and he felt his knees go weak. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." She nodded, and he crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. She laughed, and he set her down carefully, suddenly aware that he needed to be gentle with her now. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I saw Dr. Whitmore this morning." He confirmed it. The baby should come in May. Jacob felt tears streaming down his face, and he did not care. He was going to be a father. They were going to have a family. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Jacob's life. He watched Eliza's belly grow, felt the baby kick beneath his hand, and marveled at the miracle of it all. He found himself planning, thinking about the future in ways he never had before. He wanted to give his child everything, opportunities and security and love. He worked harder than ever, putting in long hours at the store and taking on extra projects to save money. Margaret and Thomas were thrilled at the prospect of becoming grandparents, and Margaret spent hours knitting tiny clothes and blankets. She gave Eliza advice about pregnancy and childbirth, and Jacob was grateful for her presence, for the way she mothered Eliza and eased his own worries. In late April, as Eliza's time drew near, Jacob found himself unable to sleep. He would lie awake at night, listening to her breathe, and think about all the things that could go wrong. Childbirth was dangerous, and women died from it all the time. The thought of losing Eliza terrified him more than anything he had ever faced. "Stop worrying," Eliza murmured one night, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I can feel you thinking." "I cannot help it," Jacob admitted. "What if something goes wrong?" "Then we will deal with it," Eliza said. "But I am strong, Jacob. I survived those outlaws. I can survive this." He held her close, taking comfort in her confidence even as his own fears gnawed at him. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she said. "And I love our baby. We are going to be fine." On May 15, 1880, at 3 in the morning, Eliza woke Jacob with a hand on his shoulder. "It is time," she said, and he could hear the tension in her voice. He was up and dressed in seconds, his heart pounding. He ran to fetch Dr. Whitmore while Margaret stayed with Eliza, and by the time he returned, Eliza was in labor. The next several hours were the longest of Jacob's life. He sat downstairs with Thomas, unable to do anything but wait and listen to the sounds from above. Every time Eliza cried out, his heart twisted in his chest, and he wanted to go to her, but Margaret had firmly told him he would be in the way. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to rise, he heard a new sound, a baby's cry, thin and strong. Jacob jumped to his feet, and a moment later Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, her face flushed and her eyes shining. "You have a son," she said, "and Eliza is fine. They are both fine." Jacob took the stairs 2 at a time. He burst into the bedroom and saw Eliza propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets Margaret had knitted. Dr. Whitmore was packing up his instruments, and he smiled at Jacob. "Congratulations," he said. "You have a healthy boy." Jacob moved to Eliza's side and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. His eyes were closed and he was making small snuffling noises. Jacob reached out with a trembling finger and touched the baby's cheek, marveling at how soft it was. "He is perfect," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "He is," Eliza agreed, "our little miracle." "What should we name him?" Jacob asked. Eliza looked down at the baby, then back at Jacob. "I was thinking William, after my uncle, if that is all right with you." Jacob felt his throat tighten. "That is perfect," he said. "William Mercer." "Billy." They sat together, the three of them, and watched the sun rise through the window. Jacob thought about another dawn, nearly 2 years ago, when he had found Eliza against that fence post. He thought about how lost she had been, how broken, and how far they had both come since then. They had built a life together, a family, and it was more than he had ever dreamed possible. Over the next few years, their family grew. In 1882, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a little girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's determination. 2 years later, another son arrived, James, who was quieter than his siblings but just as loved. The little house became too small, and in 1883, Jacob used their savings to buy a larger home closer to the store, a house with 4 bedrooms and a real parlor. The dry goods business prospered. Word spread about the quality of their goods and the fairness of their prices, and customers came from miles around. In 1885, when Thomas decided he was ready to retire, he signed the store over to Jacob and Eliza, just as he had promised. They renamed it Mercer Dry Goods, and Jacob felt a surge of pride every time he saw the new sign. They became pillars of the community. Jacob served on the town council, and Eliza was active in the church and the ladies' auxiliary. They hosted dinners for neighbors and friends, and their home was always full of laughter and life. The children grew up healthy and happy, surrounded by love and the kind of stability that Jacob had never known as a child. But Jacob never forgot where they had come from or how close they had come to never finding each other. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would tell the children the story of how he had found their mother, asleep against a fence post at dawn. He would tell them about the sunrise, about the moment he knew he could not leave her alone, about the way she had looked at him when she woke and how it had changed everything. "You saved Mama," Billy would say, his eyes wide with admiration. "No," Jacob would correct him gently. "We saved each other." And it was true. Eliza had saved him from a life of loneliness and drift, had given him purpose and meaning and a reason to build something lasting. And he had saved her from despair and loss, had shown her that she could trust again, that she could love and be loved in return. The years passed, and the Wild West began to change. The railroad came to San Antonio, bringing with it new people and new opportunities. The town grew, and the lawlessness that had once defined the region began to fade. The outlaws who had killed Eliza's uncle were never caught, but Jacob learned to make peace with that. Some injustices could not be righted, some wrongs could not be undone. All you could do was move forward and try to build something better. In 1890, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Thomas and Eliza at her side. Jacob grieved with his wife, understanding that Margaret had been more than an aunt to her. She had been a mother, a friend, a constant source of love and support. They buried her in the churchyard, beneath a simple stone that bore her name and the dates of her life, and Eliza planted roses around the grave. Thomas followed her 3 years later, worn out from years of hard work and the loneliness of living without his beloved wife. Jacob and Eliza mourned him too, grateful for all he had taught them and all he had given them. They inherited the apartment above the original store, and Eliza turned it into a workshop where she could sew and design dresses, fulfilling the dream she had told Jacob about all those years ago. The children grew into young adults. Billy became a teacher, following in his mother's love of learning and her gift for connecting with people. Sarah married a young lawyer and moved to Austin, where she started her own family. James went to work with Jacob in the store, showing a natural aptitude for business that made his father proud. The house that had once been full of children's laughter became quieter, but Jacob and Eliza did not mind. They had each other, and that was enough. In the spring of 1898, Jacob and Eliza celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children came home for the occasion, bringing grandchildren that Jacob delighted in spoiling. They held a party at the house, with food and music and dancing, and Jacob looked around at all the people who had come to celebrate with them and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Jacob and Eliza sat on the porch and watched the sunset. It was a ritual they had maintained for years, this quiet time together at the end of the day, and Jacob cherished it. "You ever think about that morning?" Eliza asked, her hand in his. "When you found me?" "All the time," Jacob admitted. "I think about how easily I could have ridden past, how close we came to never meeting. It terrifies me." "But you did not ride past," Eliza said. "You stopped, you stayed. That is what matters." "I suppose you are right," Jacob said, "but I am still grateful. Every single day I am grateful that I found you." "And I am grateful that you did," Eliza said. She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. Jacob thought about all the years they had shared, all the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and struggles. He thought about their children and grandchildren, about the business they had built, about the life they had created together out of nothing but determination and love. It had not been easy, and there had been times when he had doubted they would make it, but they had, and that was what mattered. "I love you," he said quietly. "I never get tired of saying it." "I love you too," Eliza said, "and I never get tired of hearing it." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together. The Wild West was changing, becoming tamer and more settled, but Jacob did not mind. He had everything he needed right here in this moment with this woman by his side. In 1902, Jacob and Eliza decided to take a trip, something they had talked about for years but had never managed to do. They left James in charge of the store and took the train to Galveston, the city where Eliza and her uncle had started their journey all those years ago. It was bittersweet for Eliza, walking the streets where her uncle had lived, but Jacob was there beside her, holding her hand and helping her remember the good times as well as the tragic ones. They stood on the beach and watched the waves roll in, the Gulf of Mexico stretching out endlessly before them. It was so different from the dry scrubland of San Antonio, and Jacob marveled at the vastness of it, the raw power of the water. "My uncle used to bring me here when I was a little girl," Eliza said. "He would tell me stories about sailing ships and distant lands. He had such dreams." "He would be proud of you," Jacob said, "of everything you have accomplished." "I hope so," Eliza said. "I like to think he is watching over us, that he knows we are happy." "I am sure he is," Jacob said, and he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as the wind whipped her hair around their faces. They spent a week in Galveston, exploring the city and enjoying the novelty of being somewhere new. But as much as Jacob enjoyed the trip, he found himself eager to return home to the familiar rhythms of their life in San Antonio. He had spent so many years wandering, searching for something he could not name, and now that he had found it, he did not want to be away from it for long. When they returned, they threw themselves back into their work and their family with renewed energy. Jacob began writing down the story of his life, wanting to leave something for his grandchildren to remember him by. He wrote about his childhood in Missouri, about coming west and the loneliness he had felt, about the morning he found Eliza and how it had changed everything. He wrote about their courtship and their marriage, about the children they had raised and the business they had built. It was a simple story, nothing extraordinary, but it was theirs, and that made it precious. Eliza read what he had written and cried, telling him it was beautiful. She added her own memories, her own perspective on the events they had shared, and together they created something that was more than just a record of their lives. It was a testament to the power of love and resilience, to the way two broken people could come together and create something whole. By 1905, Jacob was 57 years old, and while he was still strong and capable, he could feel the years catching up with him. His joints ached on cold mornings, and he tired more easily than he once had. But he did not complain. He had lived a good life, a full life, and he was content. That summer, their youngest grandchild, Sarah's daughter Emma, came to stay with them for a few months. She was a lively girl of 8, full of questions and energy, and Jacob adored her. She would follow him around the store, asking about everything, and he would patiently explain the business to her, just as Thomas had once explained it to him. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma climbed into Jacob's lap and looked up at him with serious eyes. "Grandpa," she said, "how did you know you loved Grandma?" Jacob looked at Eliza, who was sitting beside him, and smiled. "That is a good question," he said. "I think I knew the first time I saw her smile. It was like the sun coming out after a storm. It made everything better." "That is silly," Emma said, but she was smiling. "Maybe," Jacob said, "but it is true. Sometimes you just know deep down that someone is special, and when you find that person, you do not let them go." "I hope I find someone like that someday," Emma said wistfully. "You will," Eliza assured her, "and when you do, you will know it." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer and settled against Jacob's chest, content to watch the sky change colors. Jacob held her close, thinking about all the sunsets he had watched from this porch, all the moments he had shared with Eliza and their family. He thought about how different his life might have been if he had not stopped that morning, if he had not sat beside Eliza and waited for her to wake. The thought made him shudder, and he pushed it away. In 1910, Jacob and Eliza celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. They were both in their 60s now, slowing down but still active, still engaged with the world around them. The store was thriving under James's management, and their other children were successful and happy. They had 11 grandchildren now, and each one was a joy. Jacob found himself thinking more and more about the past, about the journey that had brought him to this place. He thought about his parents, long dead, and wished they could have known Eliza and their grandchildren. He thought about William Hartwell, Eliza's uncle, whose death had been so senseless and tragic. He thought about the outlaws who had killed him, wondering whatever became of them, whether they had faced justice or simply disappeared into the vastness of the West. But mostly, he thought about Eliza. He thought about her strength and her grace, about the way she had rebuilt her life after losing everything. He thought about the love they had shared, the family they had built, the years they had spent together. And he felt grateful, so deeply grateful for every single moment. One night in 1912, Jacob woke to find Eliza standing by the window looking out at the stars. He got out of bed and went to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," she said softly. "How lucky we are, how much we have been given." "We have worked hard for it," Jacob said. "I know," Eliza said, "but still we are lucky. So many people never find what we have." "That is true," Jacob agreed. He held her tighter, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the familiar contours he knew as well as his own. "I love you, Eliza. I have loved you from the moment I saw you against that fence post." "I know," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "And I have loved you from the moment you sat down beside me. You made me feel safe when I thought I would never feel safe again. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me everything." They kissed, and Jacob felt the same spark he had felt all those years ago, the same connection that had drawn them together and kept them together through everything. They went back to bed and held each other, and Jacob drifted off to sleep feeling utterly at peace. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. In 1915, the world was changing rapidly, with war raging in Europe and technology advancing at a dizzying pace. San Antonio had grown into a proper city, with electric lights and automobiles and all the modern conveniences. Jacob and Eliza adapted to the changes, embracing some and mourning others, but always facing them together. In 1918, when Jacob was 70 years old, he suffered a mild stroke. It left him weakened on one side, and he had to give up working in the store entirely. It was a difficult transition for him, this forced retirement, but Eliza was there, helping him through it with the same patience and love she had always shown. They spent their days quietly, reading and talking and enjoying the company of their family. Billy brought his children to visit every Sunday, and Sarah came down from Austin as often as she could. James stopped by the house every evening after closing the store, bringing news and keeping them connected to the world outside their walls. Jacob treasured these visits, these glimpses of the legacy he and Eliza had created. One warm evening in May of 1920, as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, Eliza took Jacob's hand and squeezed it gently. "You remember what you said to me that first morning?" she asked. "When I woke up and you were sitting beside me," Jacob thought back, trying to recall the exact words. "I said you were safe, that I was not going to hurt you." "You said I was safe," Eliza confirmed, "and you were right. From that moment on, I have always felt safe with you. Even when things were hard, even when we were struggling, I knew that as long as we were together, everything would be all right." "I felt the same way," Jacob said. "You have been my anchor, Eliza, my home. Everything good in my life started the day I found you." "We found each other," Eliza corrected gently, just as she always did. "We saved each other." "Yes," Jacob agreed. "We did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to violet. Jacob thought about all the sunsets they had watched together, all the dawns they had greeted side by side. He thought about the children they had raised, the grandchildren who would carry their legacy into the future, the great-grandchildren who were just beginning to arrive. He thought about the life they had built from nothing, from a chance encounter on a lonely stretch of Texas scrubland. He thought about that morning, about how he had been chasing a stolen horse and had instead found something infinitely more valuable. He thought about sitting beside her while she slept, watching the sun rise and feeling something shift inside him. He had not known then what it meant, that feeling, but he knew now. It had been the beginning of everything. "I would do it all again," Jacob said suddenly. "Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of doubt, I would do it all again exactly the same because it led me to you." Eliza turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "So would I," she said. 1,000 times over I would do it all again." They kissed, and Jacob tasted salt from her tears and his own. They were old now, their bodies worn and their time growing short, but the love between them was as strong as it had ever been. Maybe stronger, tempered by years and tested by hardship and proven again and again. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, Jacob held Eliza close and thought about how blessed he was. He had lived a full life, a good life, surrounded by love and family and purpose. He had taken a chance that morning 42 years ago, had stopped when he could have ridden past, had stayed when he could have left. And that one decision, that one moment of compassion and connection had changed everything. "Thank you," he whispered into Eliza's hair. "For what?" she asked. "For waking up," he said. "For trusting me, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you for finding me," Eliza said. "For sitting beside me, for watching the sunrise with me, for giving me a reason to keep going." They stayed on the porch until the stars were bright overhead and the air grew cool, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. Finally, Eliza shivered and Jacob helped her to her feet. They went inside, their fingers intertwined, and prepared for bed. That night, Jacob dreamed of the morning he found Eliza. He dreamed of the fence post and the rising sun, of her face pale and peaceful in sleep, of the moment when her eyes opened and he saw the fear and hope warring in their green depths. He dreamed of all the days that followed, each one a gift, each one a miracle. And when he woke the next morning with Eliza beside him, her hand in his, he smiled. Jacob Mercer lived to the age of 75, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1923. Eliza was beside him when he went, holding his hand and whispering words of love. She grieved him deeply, but she also felt grateful for the years they had shared, for the love that had sustained them both. She lived another 7 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the man he had been and the life they had built together. She told them about the morning he found her, about how he had saved her life in more ways than one. And she told them that true love was not just a fairy tale, that it was real and powerful and worth fighting for. When Eliza died in 1930, at the age of 75, she was laid to rest beside Jacob in the churchyard where they had been married. Their children placed a single stone to mark both graves with a simple inscription: Jacob and Eliza Mercer together in life. Together in eternity, he found her at dawn, and they watched the sunrise together. Their children and grandchildren continued the legacy they had built. James ran Mercer Dry Goods for another 20 years before passing it on to his own son. Billy's children became teachers and doctors, carrying on his love of learning and service. Sarah's family thrived in Austin, building their own businesses and contributing to their community. And every generation told the story of how it all began, of the cowboy who found a woman asleep against a fence post at dawn, who sat beside her and watched the sun rise, who saw something in her that made him want to stay. They told the story of how two broken people found each other in the vastness of the Texas wilderness and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The story became family legend, passed down through the years, embellished and polished but always rooted in truth. Great-grandchildren who never knew Jacob and Eliza personally grew up hearing about them, about the love they shared and the life they built. And they carried that story with them, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when everything seems lost, hope can be found. Love can be found. Redemption can be found. By the time the 21st century arrived, the Mercer family had spread across Texas and beyond, a sprawling network of descendants who could all trace their lineage back to that fateful morning in August of 1878. Some became doctors and lawyers, others became artists and teachers, and still others followed in Jacob's footsteps, working the land and raising cattle. But all of them carried the legacy of Jacob and Eliza, the story of two people who refused to give up, who chose love over fear, who built something beautiful out of tragedy. The little house where Jacob and Eliza raised their children still stood in San Antonio, carefully preserved by descendants who understood its significance. The original Brennan Dry Goods building, later Mercer Dry Goods, had been converted into a museum, showcasing the history of the family and the early days of San Antonio. Visitors could see the account books Jacob had kept, the dresses Eliza had sewn, the photographs of their children and grandchildren. They could read the memoir Jacob had written, his simple, heartfelt account of a life well lived. But more than the physical artifacts, what endured was the story itself. The story of the cowboy who found a woman against a fence post, who chose compassion over convenience, who saw a stranger in need and decided to help. The story of the woman who survived tragedy and found the strength to love again, who rebuilt her life from nothing and created something lasting. The story of two people who proved that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to simply stay, to be present, to offer comfort and connection to someone who needs it. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about humanity, about the power of small choices to change lives, about the ripple effects of kindness and courage. It was a story that reminded people that even in the darkest moments when all seems lost, there is still hope. There is still the possibility of redemption, of transformation, of love. And so the story lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the power of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Jacob and Eliza were long gone, their bones resting in the Texas soil they had loved, but their legacy remained. In the children they raised, in the business they built, in the community they helped shape, in the countless lives they touched, directly and indirectly, across the years. The fence post where Jacob found Eliza was long gone, rotted away or torn down to make room for progress. The exact spot was unmarked, forgotten, lost to time, but it did not matter. What mattered was what happened there, the moment of connection that changed two lives and set in motion a chain of events that would echo through the generations. On warm evenings in San Antonio, when the sun sets in a blaze of orange and pink, when the air finally begins to cool and the stars start to appear, you can imagine them there, Jacob and Eliza, sitting on a porch somewhere, holding hands and watching the sky change colors. You can imagine them young again, full of hope and dreams, or old and weathered, content and satisfied. It does not matter which, because in all the years between, in all the moments they shared, the essence of them remained the same. Two people who found each other when they needed it most. Two people who chose to build a life together, to face whatever came with courage and love. Two people who proved that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can have the most profound effects. The sun rises every morning in Texas, painting the sky in brilliant colors, chasing away the darkness of night. And somewhere in the collective memory of a family that spans generations, the story continues. The cowboy finds the woman against the fence post. He sits beside her. He watches the sun rise. She wakes, and everything begins anew.